It's the 9th of April, and we are pleased to have with us tonight the newly minted Senate Republican leader for the House, or for the Senate minority. And this is Daniel Bonham. Daniel, thank you for joining us here tonight.
Kevin, it's good to be with you.
And, you kind of jump straight into it because this is one of these uh, midterm, I guess, between different elections. You kind of have to jump in, parachute right in. But of course, you're a tight group as a caucus, and we know there's a lot of circumstances that surround what happened. But first, let's talk about okay, how you became the new leader, and then also a little bit about yourself and your district, because a lot of folks probably don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a safe assumption to think that most people don't know who I am. Yeah, so I've been in the legislature since 2017. I was appointed when John Huffman had been tapped by the Trump administration to be the USDA Rural Development Director for the state of Oregon, and leaving a vacancy in District 59, requiring a Republican to replace him. And I threw my hat in the ring at the time. And simultaneously, I think the first conversation I ever had with somebody was, who are you and why don't we know you? And I think I'm like most Republicans here in the state of Oregon. I was raising a family. We were running a small business. And, other than going to church and doing some mission trip with our church and coaching 8th grade basketball, I wasn't really politically active. I was paying attention. I thought I was a well-informed voter, but, I wasn't involved with the PCPs. I had not engaged really locally. I knew that John Huffman was my state rep. I knew that Ted Ferrioli was our state senator. And interestingly, he was moving on, and Cliff Bentz was being appointed to his seat. So that's how I came in. And then 2018 short session, 2018 election cycle. Christine Drazen and I got into Republican leadership at the end of 2019. And for the first time ever, Republicans picked up a couple House seats. I think it had been 10 years since Republicans had won a seat when we picked up 2. We lost 1, so we went from 22 to 23, and we were 86 votes short, I think, of picking up Jeff Helfrich that cycle.
Yep.
Now Jeff obviously is back and leading the House Republican caucus, but yeah, so I had been in leadership in the House, came over to the Senate. When I met our Senate squad, it's so different having half as many people in the caucus. The chamber's half the size, the caucus is half the size. So, your relationships just are that much more important. There's only so many people that you have to get to know, but simultaneously, there's also the opportunity, if you burn a bridge, that you've burned it forever. So, came into the caucus, people probably don't know this either. I lost my wife to cancer in December of 2022. And so, that election cycle for me was everybody else carrying the weight. I had my name on the ballot, but, John Swanson, who had been running Chuck Thompson's campaigns, was my campaign manager. He knew the district really well. And to a certain extent, they had to run the campaign around me because I was at home, taking care of Lori in ultimately what ended up being her final days. But that really set a tone for how I entered the caucus too. I was catching up. I was going through a pretty significant emotional
experience.
Season of my life. And so I came into the caucus. I knew, Lynn Finley from serving in the House. Cedric and Suzanne Weber came over. I had worked with Fred Gerard. I had worked with Tim Knope. I had worked with Bill Hansel, so I knew some of the caucus members. I knew who Kim Thatcher and Dennis Linthicum were. I knew who Brian Boquist was, but I didn't really have, real strong ties to a lot of these folks. So I was meeting them for the first time. I knew Dallas Hurd relatively well. He was in the caucus at the time. And so, we came into a caucus leadership vote right off the bat on how we were going to approach things. And, I knew that I didn't have any interest in caucus leadership, and the caucus was pretty unified behind Tim, which I was excited about because I think Tim and I, on a personal level, really do see a lot of the same policy perspective.
Yeah.
Christian worldview lens kind of leads you to similar type thinking. He's got a small business background, understands my perspective as a small business owner, and so coming into that caucus, wanting to work with Tim, and he had asked me if I would be in leadership, is why I brought that up, and I had said no. I promised Lori that I wouldn't. Like I just coming out of the November election, we literally met the following week. So we had the election, we knew what the caucus was 13, and let's meet and talk about leadership. And I said no, thank you, but I appreciated it. And then Lori passed, and he called back and he said, I'm not trying to be callous. I know that you just went through this, but simultaneously you'd kind of pointed at your need to care for Lori as a reason why you didn't want to be in leadership. Would you reconsider now that that's changed? And I said, yeah, I would love to help you in any way I can. I really have been a big supporter of Tim Knope. And so we went through, a weird season as well in the legislature with ballot measure 113 and Democrats trying to push the envelope. And what does that look like? Do we have the capacity to walk? The Constitution still allows for you to deny quorum. Now there's just potentially, at the time, we didn't know what it would look like, but potentially, and there would be a consequence. And simultaneously, I looked at the language while we were still in the building, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're not saying I can't run again in 26. They're saying I can't run again in 2030. Look at the way they drafted this language. Like, this is a terrible constitutional amendment because it says I can't run in the election following the end of my term. Well, I'm not out of office until 2027. So I guess I can't run again in 2030. Like, sure, let's walk, and, they can kick us out 4 years after they want to.
Yeah, it seemed like a term limit provision rather than an actual, you're done type of thing. And back when words that you would write and then put in front of people to vote on really mattered, right? The good old days.
Well, pretty disappointing that a Supreme Court, and this just proves that it's a political court, 7-0 in any other circumstance. When we pass legislation, if we say shall instead of may, it doesn't matter what our speech was on the floor, providing any legislative history or legislative intent. If we use the wrong word in the language, we're bound by what's in the law, not by what we said we meant. And so pretty odd to have the Supreme Court 7-0. I might have understood a 4-3 vote, but a 7-0 vote just baffles me that for the first time in the history of the state of Oregon, what it reads in the Constitution to anybody that would read that sentence doesn't mean what it actually means. So our caucus went through that fire. Again, absolutely wholeheartedly supported Tim in the posturing that we took to walk. We did have a little bit of disagreement on how we negotiated coming back. Like, there were some things within the caucus, and the challenge is, you can imagine when you have 13 people, everybody had their reason for walking. We didn't have one reason. We had 13 people with reasons. My reasons were multifaceted.
The same thing. Yeah.
I thought House Bill 2002 and 2005 were unconstitutional the way they were written. I wanted those amended. I thought that the Senate rules and the ORS that requires us to have plain language as the bill explanation, I thought that was legit. And as soon as we found that law and said, oh my gosh, we haven't been abiding by this, we should abide by this law, and Democrats were just like, we don't have to. Well, that's a terrible way to govern. Like, to just disregard the law. I mean, the first thing we do is we swear an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of Oregon. So to say we don't care about that, I thought was a little odd that we could just so simply dismiss the law and say we're above it. I thought that was terrible. And so that was one of the reasons. And then, fundamentally, I just absolutely disagreed with the desire to have a 12-year-old be able to have an abortion without their parents' consent, a 15-year-old to be able to have transgender surgery without their parents' consent. I think the Supreme Court has ruled on these things. If you're a minor, your parent absolutely has the right to engage in your medical well-being. So ultimately, they amended those bills, to restore parental rights within the context of abortion to a certain extent, and then ultimately, absolutely, for children that would be looking to have transgender surgery. They amended the gun bill to remove the provision to move it up to 21 from 18, to remove the requirement for serial numbers. That bill got significantly watered down. I wanted those bills, to just go away, though. I do still believe they both fundamentally challenge constitutionality. And so, if I swore an oath to uphold those things, why would I let you pass them? But enough of our caucus members did think that that was an okay thing, and they came back, and I absolutely respect them. We all represent districts, and that is the challenge with a caucus. Like, I was sent there to represent my district, and yes, to the extent that we can have a greater say in how Oregon governs itself, I've got a responsibility to all voters, but I really have ultimate responsibility to the people that live in my district. And so we all take that serious as Republicans, and enough Republicans thought that the bills had been modified enough to come back and finish the session and complete our other constitutional obligation, which is to have a budget. And so ultimately, I did come back as well. I think I missed a couple extra days as they passed 2002 and 2005 and then returned. And the caucus was unified, though. Like there were some split decisions there that I'm describing, but ultimately there was no infighting. There was no name calling. There was no bashing out in the media. People weren't throwing stones. And the caucus has held that posture. And I think that's why you saw an easy session in 2024. And I say easy in the sense that it was what a short session should be. We were responsive to two very top of mind issues for voters in the state of Oregon, which was ballot measure 110, recriminalizing drugs, and the other that a lot of people are talking about and thinking about, which is our approach to, a lack of housing and how we go about resolving that issue. And so a united caucus with the threat of us denying quorum again, I think kept some accountability in the 2024 session. And so,
and no extra cost, right? Because basically, when somebody wasn't going to be able to run again, or it already exceeded the 10 days, the Democrats lacked any further leverage. And so this bipartisan-ish session was actually the byproduct of standing firm when they went too far, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so then we got done with session, and there had been some conversations from a few members about, hey, what are we going to do? We have some members that aren't coming back. There has been some precedent set in leadership transition when the leader wasn't coming back, when they either were running for a different office or retiring, that there was a transition that should be imminent, was kind of the position of previous caucuses. So I just went to Tim and I said, what are your thoughts on continuing the lead? Is this something you want to do? Do you feel like no one else wants to do it? And so we just started a conversation. And I hadn't talked to any other caucus members at that point. And ultimately, the conversation with Tim led to me then reaching out to caucus members saying, hey, I think Tim and I are in agreement that there could be a transition. Are you interested in this? Because one, I didn't know, maybe the caucus is like, no, we don't want to change. We like Tim that much that we want to continue on. And I do think, too, Tim is on the same mission that I'm on, which is to restore balance to the state of Oregon. And he's not going anywhere in terms of his commitment to help Republicans get elected. He's going to continue to help us fundraise, and he's really going to be focused on that Central Oregon race. But to the extent that I can lean on him to help us statewide, this really was more of a passing of a baton between two teammates that are running the same race than it was anything else. And I was super thrilled that it was a 13-0 vote.
He nominated you, basically.
He did. He was the one in the meeting that made the nomination. And again, super humbled by that he'd be willing to do that. He's been just an absolute champion and class act this entire time. And again, I want to honor him in what I'm about to do, which is to try and get more Republicans elected. So that's the story of the leadership change. I'm super thankful there was no drama. If Tim had said, I want to keep leading, this wouldn't have happened. I think at the end of the day, the decision to move in a new direction is kind of the same direction in a lot of respects. I do have some different connections. I'll have a little bit different team, but a lot of the faces will be the same. And yeah, and it really is go fight win. Like we need to hold firm. 2025. If you look at anything that Tina Kotek has put together a group and said, hey, for example, her housing task force she put together, make recommendations, and it was taxes and regulation.
Yeah, more of both.
Yeah.
Which is ironic, isn't it? When you're trying to get more housing, one of the things standing in the way is actually the government and its regulations, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So to double down on that, I thought was really odd. And quite frankly, we know that they've got a transportation funding problem. Our heavy haulers have been overburdened, and they need to make that right. They know they need to. And so, how would you feel about a 95-cent gas tax?
Yeah.
I mean, no one wants that. And simultaneously, like, I think we've poisoned the well on tolling. And so they're looking at something and saying we need some revenue stream, and we can't just allocate general fund dollars, even though we can. We won't. And
they won't. Right.
Yeah. And so, hey, we need a new tax. And there are going to be some real discussions about ratcheting up, I would imagine, the corporate activity tax, because we need more dollars for schools. And, they keep compartmentalizing these things and making everything a silo. And you've got to have a dedicated tax to pay for whatever. And yeah, it's a challenge because we continue to see bloated government. I keep pointing to the fact that Tina Kotek has the lowest approval rating in the nation. She was elected by, well, let's say it this way. More people wanted someone else to be governor.
That's right. That's exactly right. And also, I think besides the problems that she could say she inherited, even though she was Speaker of the House and oversaw nearly the creation and exacerbation of all the problems that Kate Brown was, getting her low ratings for, she inherited Kate Brown's low ratings very quickly, didn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, doubling down on very similar policies.
Yeah. And that's a pity because the 2022 election probably just didn't do enough to teach the majority and the governor that they needed to change direction. That didn't happen, ironically enough, until you guys stood firm in 2023 and said no to these specific items, and then really boxed them in 2024, where they actually had to do something about Measure 110. There was also that ballot initiative effort that would have put this in front of voters anyway. It's Max Williams, I think, was working on that, and that also put pressure on them. And so it was almost like 2022 didn't teach them what the lesson they needed, but 2023 and the beginning of 2024 might have started to push them in a direction they just had to go. So now the next step is to hold them accountable, right, for all of these policies and to make the alternative case. Because yes, walking out is a limited tool. It still exists, right?
Yeah.
But you need to win the battle at the ballot box. But before we go to that, because I know that's actually a big focus of what you're going to be doing, you mentioned about some of the policy priorities and the things that you kind of expect, the battles you expect to fight, which is going to center around paying for a transportation system that I thought we'd paid for.
Right.
Yeah.
What was House Bill 2017 from 2017, except for to pay for a bunch of infrastructure improvements to our transportation network, and which of those projects have been done? Like on a micro level, we had a roundabout that was supposed to help the people out in my old house district coming out of Crooked River Ranch going into Terrebonne. There was a roundabout that was supposed to go in. It was like a $20 million project at the time that's become like a $56 million project. And Deschutes County is having to kick in a bunch of money. And it's just an absolute mess. Well, why didn't we build it back when it was a $20 million project?
And haven't you, don't you admire all the work they did in the roads Rose Quarter I-5 repair of that terrible bottleneck. And don't you admire all the work they did?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
me
still
neither.
exists. Yeah, it still exists. So, what are we talking? I mean, the Abernathy Bridge, I guess, is one that they can point to that they're doing something on. But I mean, realistically, there was a laundry list of projects that were supposed to have been funded. And I know some are pointing to, well, we were supposed to be able to incorporate tolling. We don't have tolling, so that's the reason why we haven't done some of this stuff. But yeah, no, there was a significant allocation of resources back in 2017 that only became a down payment on a more expensive now version of a then project.
Well, and then they start taking on and biting off bigger and bigger projects, like the replacement of the I-5 bridge over the Columbia River,
Right.
which they studied for an enormous amount of time and spent several $100 million studying it uh, to produce a result that, as I recall, was going to be a bridge with less capacity and a max rail line that at least one side of the river didn't want.
Right.
And so they didn't build anything. And here we are 10 years later.
Well, we do have, again, I mean, there are projects that pop up. Like we've known that the Hood River Bridge was starting to fail. It has been, significantly diminishing in weight capacity over the last few years, and to the point where, it is a $500 million project in and of itself. And there's federal matching dollars that can come, and there's state investment from Washington and Oregon that needs to come. But it's probably another $125 million that we're going to have to put towards that bridge, or we would lose that capacity. And then you've got, Bridge of the Gods 20 miles away that, again, needs some seismic retrofit as well. And then you go to the Dalles Bridge 20 miles the other way. So, we do have significant infrastructure that has been slowly eroding over the decades that needs attention. We should forecast better and know when these things are coming. I think the other big question I have is, the governor still has doubled down on this. Only electric cars for sale come 2035. Toyota has scrapped their electric vehicle program because they said there's no demand. Ford just delayed the F-150 Lightning the next round of production because they said there's no demand. So, why would we dictate in Oregon a commodity that is not, one, in demand, but two, lacks the infrastructure to deploy it to the level that you are saying that it is going to take over the market? It just, to me, it's baffling. And yet she has not pulled back on that. It's still, her policy that, this is a executive order that takes place by 2035. It is insane. It's a virtue signal that is not held by the majority of Oregonians.
Yeah, and it's political too, isn't it? I mean, I remember that President Biden pulled together this council that was supposed to highlight the need for electric vehicles, and they invited everybody but Elon Musk and Tesla, who makes like nearly all of the vehicles that are bought in the United States, and the only working recharging network that anybody's been able to rely upon. Ford's lost billions. They are literally losing so much money and have so many parking lots full of EVs. Here's the question I always ask about mandate. If it's so good, why do you have to mandate it?
But I think too, I mean, the labor union aspect of what Ford's facing is a massive component.
Oh yeah.
I always appreciated Mary Botkin represented the dock workers, and she would come and say, Bonham, back in my day when we really were in our heyday of lobbying, we knew that business had to be successful so that they could afford to pay our people the wages we wanted. Yeah. And now we have just, come in and like a bull in a china shop, overwhelmed business with a lobbying effort to get people the most that we could possibly give them. And in some cases, at the detriment of the very business sustainability that's required to keep the job tomorrow that you have today. So, the perspective does exist. There are reasonable people out there that represent labor unions. But when you look at what happened to Ford and some of these others, when they're already struggling in this economy because of inflation and stagflation, like the economy has slowed
Right.
and stagnated, and we're facing inflation, this is a troublesome time to try and stay in business. And then when you force, labor union concessions, and again, labor unions serve a purpose. They are important, right, for the protection of employees. There's a time and place for labor unions, and yet right now is a time for compromise and how do we weather storms. And it's not for jamming political agendas or getting what we can while we can get it. Like right now is a time for our economy to get back on its feet and to do it cooperatively. And I know some people will point to different aspects of where dollars end up to say that this is justified. But yeah, the decision by Ford and the decision by Toyota, with everything else that they're facing right now, I think should be a massive wake-up call for people that have this political agenda that is not going to be realized in at least today's marketplace.
Yeah, if there's a transition, you have to do it in a sustainable and affordable way. And sustainable and affordable don't describe what they're doing with these projects and programs that they're forcing along. And I just saw also one of your colleagues, Senator Finley, was highlighting that he's concerned that the Highway Trust Fund is dangerously low on funding.
Yep.
And I'm puzzled because weren't we swimming in money? Didn't we just have like enormous amounts of cash being infused into the state, and spending levels went up? And as you said, now they won't allow general funds to be used for any of these things. But weren't we experiencing record revenues coming in? So how do you get record revenues and record federal transfers and still find a way to run out of money for something that you actually expect the state to do, which is to build and maintain roads and bridges?
I mean, that is the thing that if we could come up with the 30-second elevator pitch to talk to every Oregonian as to why balance matters in the legislature, like the explanation of where the budget is today versus where it was. And I go back to my comment about silos. Like this whole idea of saying that, schools are only going to get the money that comes from this specific allocation from the general fund, this specific allocation from lottery dollars, and then we're going to have this cat tax. Well, the cat tax didn't layer on top. It removed some of the general fund allocation so we could spend it elsewhere. And again, coming out of this session, I think we gave $450 million in labor union raises. We spent almost $2 billion when you add up everything that was in the bills from the short session. Was that the intention of the short session? Was if you had annual sessions, you could pass a budget in 23 and then come back and take another bite at the apple when you realized the revenue forecast had been improved? Like, I don't think that was the intent of annualized sessions, but yet that's how we've treated them. If there's more money to be had, we're going to spend it all. And again, we're going to silo it, though, to where you don't give money to transportation when they need it. You point to the gas tax and you say, well, we didn't keep the gas tax flowing with any consideration of what electric vehicles would do. We raised the registration fee for electric vehicles. And so like we've kind of positioned ourselves to where the only thing that makes sense is like a vehicle mile tax. Well, okay, I think there's a lot of people that could say, well, that kind of makes sense because if you're using the roads, you should pay for the roads. But you and I know that people out where I live have to travel further to everything.
They do,
drive
yeah.
further to where we worship. We drive further to where we go to school. We drive further to where we go to work. We drive further for our healthcare services. Everything is further. Like I used to represent Wheeler County. I don't anymore, but it was the most miles per capita that people put on their cars were in Wheeler County.
Wow.
And it was not the wealthiest county in the state.
No.
But
no, and actually the wealthier counties look down on these counties, I think, sometimes and think, well, let them eat cake. It's just, I'm sorry, but we're just not going to let you drive as far because we're convinced that you're going to destroy the planet or whatever. And it's simply not considerate of the needs they have, telling them what kind of car they got to buy, especially when a lot of people do drive pickup trucks for real reasons
Yeah.
in parts of the state. It's frustrating, and I also wonder if the other message they didn't get in 2022, and they still have to get, is that there's an entire state out there that's different from the Portland metro area, that has different needs, and the legislature should actually be able to reflect that diversity of needs so that there's compromises, right? If those compromises can satisfy people, but I'm concerned if they start doing a mileage tax, and I'm sure this is on your mind too, they have to track everything you're doing. And once they start doing that, gee, what downside could there be to that?
But that is the big question, right? Like if it was handled the way my insurance company, right? They say, how many miles are you going to travel this year? I give them a benchmark of 20,000 miles that I think I'm going to put on my car this year. Oops, I hit 36,000 this last year because I've been traveling all around my district and around the state. But okay, at the end of the year, now we reconcile. You told us 20, we based your rates on that. You went 36. We're going to add to your premium this year, or you can pay this amount to make up for what, because, I'm okay with my insurance company doing that.
Forecast better the next year, probably.
Yeah, a little different forecast. But if it's self-reporting, that's one thing. I remember conversations when we were talking about the carbon tax, when we were doing the fight over whether or not we wanted a cap and trade system, and people were pointing to the transportation sector as an emitter, and oh well, we already know where you are. We could just know, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, no, you're not tracking my phone to then tax me. No, thank you. So I do think I still have questions over that, and to go back to it, I do think it disproportionately impacts rural Oregonians. And I think the ultimate desire of the people that are pushing this is they don't want people on the road anyway. Like that's
they
really
don't,
their
they don't
ultimate
like cars.
Yeah,
no,
they don't like cars.
Well, and I think the problem too, I think about is that if this system is brought to you by and enforced by the same people who handled all of the lockdowns during COVID, for which they've never repented for the excesses, the failures, and frankly, the things that never had any basis in science or fact, that they did decide to just order us to do because they could.
Yeah.
Even have some of these powers still, right? Through rulemaking, that they can just pretty much turn on and turn off things like a mask mandate if they want. Are we going to hand them the power to decide where we can go, if we can go, how often we can go to them? For whatever reason, they might say it's originally because they need to be able to tax it so they can pay for roads. But pretty soon they're saying, you go to the grocery store a little bit too much, Daniel. I think you need to go less. I think you might be consuming too much. And by the way, we're concerned about this virus that just hit. And I think we're going to take everybody in this category of vehicle and tell you that you can drive half as much as you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to get slammed with like a giant fine, or you'll get arrested. Ouch.
Well, so project all this conversation from transportation onto healthcare.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they continue to put forward a bill every session that tries to move House Bill 70 or Senate Bill 704 in the 2023 session would have mandated universal single-payer healthcare system by 2026.
Yeah.
You want to talk about them getting involved in your life and tell them what you can and cannot do, have the state be a single-payer healthcare provider.
Yeah, they rule everything.
Well, I think, too, one of my complaints would be, well, wait a second, if my tax dollars are going to pay for your whatever surgery, then I should have a say in what you do with your life. Like, you should not be able to smoke cigarettes. You should not be able to do drugs. You should not be able to drink excessively. You should have to go for a 60-minute jog a day. Like if you're going to force me to pay for it, then I want you to live, a life that is reasonable in terms of your health inputs to get the health outputs. And again, that shouldn't be my place to dictate to anybody, but simultaneously that's where my mind goes, is like, wait a second, if I have to pay for it, then where's the accountability?
there's no accountability, or there's accountability. We've seen both systems, haven't we? We've seen where the government just removes personal accountability and just mandates stuff. And then we've also seen systems where it seems like there's a blank check written for stuff, at least for certain groups of people, and no accountability. And that's one of the things we were seeing with Measure 110 and what was happening with a lot of folks just, doing fentanyl and meth in the streets. There's no accountability. There's no consequences for that. And we would just hand them granola bars and Narcan and just say, keep doing it. Um, I don't know which one's going to happen, but I don't think either one of those involves the fundamental building blocks of our society around personal accountability, and the decision that if you're a free person, right, who's accountable to yourself until you decide to send the bill to everyone else.
I mean, you talk about fundamental building blocks, and my immediate thought process goes to family. And I think about kids, and I think about what are we teaching our kids? How are we raising our kids? And, that family unit's been under attack for the last 20 years. What we've told kids is acceptable when we legalize marijuana, when we legalize possession of hard drugs. Like, we've been telling kids that these things are okay. Even if not directly, we have been subliminally messaging like it's fine. Like,
we validated them.
These things aren't that bad.
That's right.
And they really are. And so I really am hopeful that this, House Bill 4002 that we just passed and the reversal of ballot measure 110 is us telling society, no, we actually do value being clean and sober. It is a moral better. I'm hopeful that that's the message we're sending, and that we're going to stand behind it. This was not an effort to create criminals. Like, this really was an effort to say, being clean and sober has tremendous value, not just to you personally, but to society as a whole. And how do we get you into treatment? And we're going to give you this opportunity to deflect. I'm curious how this will work. How many times do you get to deflect? I hope that you deflect, and I hope you go get treatment. And then I hope once you're done with treatment that we have a place for you to go that's not just back to the same family or friends or whomever was the influence on you. Because normally you don't just do drugs in a vacuum. Normally you're part of a community that engages in this type of risky behavior. And so, the ultimate threat, though, of having a consequence of a Class A misdemeanor and potential prison time, I do think is meaningful and impactful when it comes to that decision-making process. Someone needs to be motivated to want to better their life. Like, they have to make that decision for themselves, right? They have to want to be clean and sober. I can't make that decision for you. But at the same time, if they're thinking, I can go to treatment, I can try and be clean and sober, or I can go to jail, I would hope that they would want the treatment.
Yeah. I mean, society doesn't have to be neutral on that decision. We can actually, and that's what's changed back to what it is. And, you made me think of something too, because, there's a crime wave in the state. It's tied to this. Many parts of the state have been affected to a greater degree than others, but you can see it on the I-5 corridor. You can see it I've learned recently on Highway 101 right up the coast is like now the alternative corridor. There's pockets where it's really intense in different places. But when I think about these improvements in the law and these things that like Measure 110's reform, House Bill 4002, isn't there a role for the legislature to perform oversight, transparent, accountable oversight? And I've become concerned that actually that's not something that the state legislature gets to do. I didn't know until back right after Kitzhaber resigned, and there was that whole thing that took place, just how few mechanisms actually exist. Department heads can come in and they can just lie to a committee chair, a committee, and then there's no consequences. They're not sworn in. They didn't commit perjury like they would at the federal level. I hear repeatedly from legislators that they request information that is in the possession of a state agency that would help the legislators do a better job and hold accountable to make sure like something like House Bill 4002 is actually implemented the way they say it's supposed to be implemented. But you can't force that, apparently, can you? This is crazy.
Well, yeah. So first and foremost, one of the biggest challenges that you didn't mention, though, is when you have single party rule, right?
Yeah.
When your friend's the governor and the governor decided who that agency head was, and you're the chair of that committee, do you really want to invite that chair before someone like me that actually has questions?
That's right.
Like, you don't even want them to come to the committee. So they figure out a way to, invite a invited testimony only, where this agency comes in and just tells you their narrative, they want what they want you to know. There is no time for questions. Thank you so much for coming today, and let's move on. And again, I would say this to my colleagues in Ohio who have super majorities as Republicans, and no, like, accountability is necessary within government. When it's your friend doing it, you don't want to necessarily point it out for the political consequences, but it's the right thing to do for the good of the whole. And so, I'm hopeful, I really am, that Oregonians look at like the 24 session and they say, wow, relatively bipartisan. We did spend a ton of money. I want to be clear. Like, we spent a ton of money on things that would not have been my priority. I voted no on most of the spending bills, including for some things that benefited my district. But, when you cram the investment I need for the Bridge of the Gods in a bill that has, 500 million of other spending around the state, half of which is going to, friends of Democrats who will turn it around through their nonprofit organization to throw a fundraiser to help reelect Tina Kote. Like, I have no interest in investing in groups. This Unite Oregon nonsense, Senate Bill 1578 gave them a contract to create a website portal for people that are doing translation services. They also got like $3.5 million to buy a piece of property in East Burnside. Like, this is a group that's supposed to be focused on refugees and integration within, Oregon, and advocacy for those groups. Like, how are they getting special funding? Well, if you look at their financial statements on Orstar, who do they support? Like, you can go in there and see who they went out and knocked doors for, who they had in-kind donations for. So basically, this was Democrats funding their own apparatus, their political apparatus, with taxpayer dollars. Like, that should absolutely be illegal. It's unethical. It's immoral. It's shameful, and yet they do it. And it's there in front of you. Willamette Week wrote an article about it. I sent a letter to the governor that I think 35 of the 38 of us that are Republicans in office signed and said, veto this bill. This is absolutely inappropriate. She has yet to sign the bill, so maybe she's still considering it. Hopefully she is. But again, like, there are so many examples of that if you're not paying enough attention, they can slip them right through. And it does suck because they throw them all in an omnibus bill. And again, I'm forced to vote against a bill that has much needed infrastructure investment in my district. And I've got voters back home that said, well, how can you give Bonham credit for getting this investment when he voted no against the bill? Well, it was only in the bill because I advocated for it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have even been in the bill. But again, what am I supposed to do? And I know we need the $6 million for the bridge investment, but I know I don't want these guys to get $6 million for their special interest group that's going to turn around and use it against me in a campaign. I can't in good conscience vote for a bill that does that. So,
false choices and devil's bargains. It seems like that's all they offer. And you're right. I mean, the transparency and accountability could really alter but that was a 5-week session. There will probably be if there were any hearings and testimony on this stuff, there was probably just hours of it, right, before it moved on. So this isn't even a fully deliberative process to go and spend that volume of money on an omnibus piece of legislation.
And it is a challenge. And, the interim, you can pay attention to so many things simultaneously. Just as an example, part of the reason why I had angst with the package on housing that had some land use stuff and some other investments wasn't just that some of the money, because there were two bills. There was a policy bill and a companion bill that was a funding bill. And I took exception with both, mostly because it was fully baked before it ever got to the legislature. I mean, the governor had worked that bill with the lobby and with stakeholders, and by the time it came, it was, dotting i's and crossing t's in the legislative process. To your point, that was super quick, over 5 weeks. And if you didn't get in before session even started, you weren't going to get consideration. And I just don't think that's the transparency that we profess that we have. That's not the process. Process matters to me. I do think it's important that people have a chance to weigh in, and not just 90 seconds at a time. Thank you for coming today, Kevin. On to the next person. We didn't actually hear you, and a bunch of legislators are up sitting at the dais doing this on their phones, not paying attention. Right. And I know I've heard from the people that said, "Man, I just drove 3 hours across the state to come and testify, and I was limited to 90 seconds." And people up at the dais weren't even paying attention. And so I get the frustration, and it has been a difficult process, and I've watched it get worse in the 7 years I've been here, and not better. The COVID crisis brought the ability to do this remote testimony, which is beneficial at times. Again, when you're Lynn Finley and people in your district live 5-6 hours away from the Capitol, to invite them to testify is a challenge. And now that they can do this, it's great. Simultaneously, I think the impact is less when you're on a screen versus there in person.
Right.
So I there are plenty of issues with how the legislature is functioning. The budget is chief amongst them. And again, to bring that full circle back to that point, how do we get people at home to understand how much the state budget has grown compared to what their income has grown?
Yeah, and compared to what they're getting, I always liked what Alan Ellie used to say years ago. He goes, and this was before a lot of the really huge budget increases. He said the budget for the state budget has grown by, I think it was, he said like 75%. Are your roads 75% better? Have they improved by 70? Is education 75% better?
Yeah.
And the answer in almost every case is no. Not even close. In some cases, worse, because we know the education system actually removed the requirements for graduation, and they've started imposing things that aren't education into the system. And again, what are the constraints on that? I don't know if I want a legislature that meets all the time like Congress, but if there was more oversight, I could live with that. That almost seems like something you could do all the time and then not pass bills, but actually require that someone could come and have to come and disclose what they're doing. That'd be a real power that it's hard to sell that one, though, isn't it, to voters? And I think that's what I wanted to kind of, and I appreciate you staying on a little bit longer because you said some great stuff. I didn't even want to even interrupt, but I think there is the election year coming up where people can move the numbers and change what happens in 2025, where Tina Kotek has postponed some things into 2025, right? Why is that? Gee, I wonder.
Yeah.
It's past the election. So we have to make sure we change some numbers in the election. And there's a big challenge, right? Because there's a big turnover this time.
Big turnover. The Senate only has half of the Senate up in any 2-year cycle. So we're on 4-year terms. So half of the seats are up. And this cycle is normally the less competitive cycle. The midterm of a presidential cycle is when we have more of the swing type seats up for election. So less opportunities maybe for massive change. Simultaneously, I think we've got some quality candidates that are out there working hard. Super excited to have some savvy veterans like Mike McLean and Bruce Starr coming back. I think their wisdom and experience. Mike was leader when I came in. His leadership will be just invaluable. To have a lawyer back in the room too. We haven't had an attorney in the caucus the last year and a half, and it's just an asset to have people with different backgrounds in the room, and getting Mike back will be tremendous.
Yeah, and I think you've got there's some targeted races that I think there's not a lot of bloody primaries, which actually is kind of helpful too, right? It's that you can focus on making sure that general election, that the funds go to that, the resources go to that, and that the candidates can prepare themselves. I think Dick Anderson's one of them, isn't that right? Out on the coast.
Yeah, Dick's going to hold that seat. I have every confidence in Dick. Brian Iverson's a tremendous political operative. He's helping Dick with that race. I feel great about that. And then outside of that, it really is up to our candidates to go start to prove their mettle, start to raise some funds locally, get out, knock doors, raise their name ID. There will be investment in races, but no one's interested in investing in somebody that's not invested in themselves. So right now, kind of this season of the primary for folks that are running in difficult races is the opportunity to showcase what you're about. Like, how bad do you really want to win? How bad do you want this job? It's an easy thing to say. I know what being leader is. Like, I did talk to Tim about that. I know I'm signing up for 3 times the amount of work as a average legislator for the same amount of pay. Like, I know what this is, and I'm willing to do it. I recognize for me, this is just a season. Tim is one of the people that's facing the ballot measure 113 consequence. That's me in 2 years. And so this is a season, and then I'll pass the baton to the next person. And again, my greatest hope is that we just stay united. Like, we had that vote. It was 13-0, right? They nominated me. No one else was nominated, and everybody voted, and they all affirmed that I was their choice, which just was neat, right? Like, to have our caucus having gone through what we went through, 10 of us saying we're willing to give this up in order to take this what we felt was a righteous stand, and to just stay united through all of that we've been through. It's awesome, and I'm eager to. I've talked to every candidate that's been running in these competitive primaries that you're talking about. I've reassured them that whoever gets through, we want to work with. We don't have a desire to weigh in on these Republican primaries, and yet we want to see them work. We want to see them make the phone calls. We want to see them fundraising. It's exciting, and again, I'm curious what the national headlines are going to be.
Yeah.
McLean used to say this when he was leader. He said 100 things are going to happen in this election cycle, and you're brilliant if you can predict 7 of them.
Yeah.
Right.
So 7% success rate in predictions, right? But that's still pretty good.
Donald Trump and Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. What are we going to be talking about? We've got a group of Oregon legislators that are headed down to the border to just look. And we know immigration policy is top of mind for a lot of people right now. It's getting a lot of oxygen at the national level. So we know Oregon voters are paying attention to that. And so our desire is to say, okay, let's see what it is, and let's see how, if anything, Oregon policies are having an impact on what's happening at the border. And can we come back with some policy ideas here in Oregon? As a sanctuary state, should we be a sanctuary state in all aspects? Should there be some consideration? Are there areas where Democrats might agree with us to roll some of these things back, or find different ways? We know that there's a significant population that is still migratory in nature that services our ag community. We need employees to do these jobs. And so how do we make sure that our ag sector is stabilized with a workforce, and simultaneously making sure that we don't have criminals? We have 1,400 undocumented illegal immigrants that are in DOC. Why do we have
Department of Corrections?
Corrections, yeah, sorry. Yeah. We're paying for 1,400 people that shouldn't even be here to live in our jail system. Is that?
Yeah. And the only thing that's probably doing is preventing them from, if they did get deported, from just coming right back across the border and doing it all over again and making everyone arrest them again. That's probably the only good side to that, but you're right. And of course, we saw what happened in Georgia, in Athens, Georgia, with Lake and Riley, that girl that just went out for a jog got her head bashed in by a guy who had been arrested multiple times and shouldn't have been in the country at all. But there's a political battle happening at the national level over, should we change the law nationally on that. And by the way, I think it's not probably lost on you that there are 3 pretty serious congressional races that are going to be taking place in this state. That is probably where Oregon will impact the national level the most, because it's not exactly a presidential swing state, but it is definitely a swing state for whether or not the U.S. Congress ends up in staying in Republican hands or going the other way. And of course, that makes your job a lot harder if it goes the other way in so many ways. But
well, I'm excited too to see Boquist running for treasurer and Linthicum running for secretary of state.
Yep.
Will Lathrop is just a brilliant man and has a compelling story. I've had multiple opportunities to interact with him. I couldn't be a bigger champion for somebody than I am for Will. I just, I went to high school with Dan Rayfield. I enjoy Dan's company. At the same time, Will Lathrop has all the right motivation to do that job and to enforce law. And so just thankful for guys like him that are stepping up and putting their hat in the ring. We'll see how it all shakes out. I've got a ton of energy to do this work. I'm thrilled with the candidates we have. Got a tremendous candidate in Bend, a good candidate in Gresham.
Michael Summers, Raymond Love, retired Air Force Colonel. That's right. Yeah, you got really great candidates, and I think that and there's some races where you don't really have to fight too hard for the reelection, and so it's that mix, right? But at the same time, this is a golden opportunity for us to show. This might be the election cycle where the wind's at your back too, in so many ways.
Yeah, and again, I think one of the things I've seen a growing trend is that the national politics have been influencing Oregon. So we'll continue to make our pitch as to why Oregon needs balance and why we think the Republican solutions deserve more consideration. Simultaneously, we'll see which arguments are more compelling come November. Are people more concerned about who the president of the United States is, or are they more concerned with how Oregon is being stewards of their tax dollars?
Well, and I just want to say, I'm sure sometimes in the coming months, because as you said, you knew what you're stepping into as leader, that you may feel like the weight of the world's on your shoulders, and you should know that everybody's lifting you in prayer here in the coming months. This is not something that you're the leader. You're not the only fighter, and we're all going to be fighting by your side to deliver these results. And we really appreciate you taking the time tonight to come on, talk with us. Bring us up to speed on so many things, and we really look forward to the next time we get to have you come back, Senator.
Well, I covet your prayers. I will tell you, I mentioned my late wife earlier. I've met somebody, Kevin, and so I'm getting married in 25 days.
Congratulations.
To a beautiful lady from Jackson, Mississippi, and she's going to come out here and be part of this fight with me. And we met. She is a tremendous prayer warrior, and so when you say you're going to cover me in prayer, I absolutely, that means the world to me. Lift that up as well. That relationship's so important to me. And, my kids have taken a liking to her. Obviously, that was an important thing. And so we're excited about this next chapter. There's a lot of work to do. Fun to have a companion by my side, and looking forward to having a meaningful impact in this next election cycle.
So happy for you. Congratulations. And and I hope everybody covers you in donations too, by the way. Yes. What is the name of the website? Is it the Leadership Fund? I lose track sometimes.
The Leadership Fund.
Yep. Leadershipfund.org, I think, right?
Yep.
Good. So people can go check that out as well. Thank you, Senator, so much for joining us here tonight. And we will definitely look forward to updates as we get further into the campaign.
Perfect.
And ask us for anything you need, and we'll be there.
Thank you, Kevin.
Have a great night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone, for watching, and please share this show with everyone you can, and we'll